The tugboats release their lines at 11:30 at night, and the ship begins to move. Not dramatically. There is no roar of engines, no visible surge of power, no moment of obvious effort. The ship simply begins to separate from the berth, the dark water widening between the hull and the dock in a gap that grows from centimeters to meters, with the unhurried certainty of something that has decided to leave and cannot be reasoned with. The tugs have done their work. The pilot is on the bridge. The officers are at their stations fore and aft. The city lights of the port, the crane gantries, the container terminal floodlighting, the sodium orange of the roads beyond the fence, begin their slow movement from a head to a beam to a stern. If this kind of story is how you end your nights, please subscribe right now so you never miss one. Hit the like button. It helps this channel more than you know. And drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. We love knowing who is with us tonight. Now, let's go to sea. The ship clearing the harbour entrance is 400 meters long. Its beam is 61.5 meters, wider than a 6-lane motorway. It carries just under 24,000 shipping containers stacked in rows that reach 22 stories above the waterline. It weighs, at this departure draft, somewhere north of 200,000 tons. It is one of the largest moving objects that human beings have ever constructed, and it is navigated by a crew of 23 people. And it is leaving this port tonight for a port 11,000 kilometers away. And it will arrive in approximately 16 days. And this voyage is not unusual or remarkable in any way. This is what these ships do. They leave at night, they cross the ocean, they arrive, they leave again. The engines are coming up to full sea speed now. Somewhere deep inside the hull, 10 floors below the main deck, the main engine, a 2-stroke diesel the size of a 4-story building, is accelerating through its power settings with a low, steady increase in sound and vibration that the crew barely notices anymore, but that, if you have not been aboard a large cargo ship before, arrives in the body as something between a sound and a physical presence. Not loud from the crew accommodations, not intrusive, just there. A deep, constant, subsonic undertone that is the ship's breathing, the ship being alive, the ship doing what it was built to do. At the pilot transfer vessel is waiting at the pilot station outside the harbour entrance. The pilot, the harbour specialist who boarded the vessel this morning to navigate it out of the port, descends the accommodation ladder to the waiting boat, and the vessel is now in the hands of its own officers for the crossing. The navigation officer on watch plots the departure track on the electronic chart. The radar is scanning. The AIS, the automatic identification system that broadcasts the vessel's position, course, and speed to every other ship in the surrounding water, is transmitting. The city is already behind them. Ahead, the navigation lights of 2 other vessels are visible on the dark water, moving on their own tracks, their own crossings, their own cargo. The sea at night is not empty. It is full of ships exactly like this one, moving quietly through the dark, carrying everything the world needs. And tonight, we are going with them. In 1937, a truck driver from North Carolina named Malcolm McLean was sitting on a dock at a New Jersey port, waiting. He had driven his truck from the south, loaded with cotton bales that needed to go onto a ship bound for another coast. What he was waiting for was the longshore gang to finish their work. the slow, labour-intensive process of removing the cotton from his truck, carrying it across the dock, sorting and checking it against the manifest, and loading it piece by piece into the hold of the ship. This process, which was called break bulk cargo handling, and had been the universal method of loading ships since the time of the Phoenicians, required a separate transaction for every individual bale, crate, barrel, and sack that went aboard. A typical general cargo ship of the era carried around 200,000 separate items. Loading it took days. Each item had to be handled multiple times. Off the truck, into the warehouse, out of the warehouse, to the quayside, into a net or a sling, hoisted into the hold, stowed by the gang working below. McLean, sitting in his truck cab watching this, had a thought that would eventually change the world. What if the truck itself, or at least the cargo section of it, could be lifted directly onto the ship? What if there were no intermediate handling at all? Just the box going from truck to ship to truck, at the other end, with no one touching what was inside it at any point in the journey. It took him 19 years to act on this idea. In the interval, he built one of the largest trucking companies in America, accumulating the capital and the business acumen that the plan would require. In 1956, he sold his trucking company, bought a shipping line, converted 2 World War II tanker ships to carry containers, and on April the 26th, 1956, at the port of Newark, New Jersey, loaded 58 aluminium truck bodies onto the deck of a converted tanker called the Ideal X. The ship sailed to Houston. The containers were lifted off and put onto waiting trucks and driven to their destinations. No individual items were touched. No warehouse storage was required. No gang of longshoremen sorted and counted and carried. At the time, loading cargo by the traditional break bulk method cost approximately $5.86 per ton, so McLean's container method cost 16 cents per ton, a 36-fold reduction in loading costs. A conventional cargo ship needed 8 to 10 days to load or unload 10,000 tons of general cargo. The same volume in containers could be handled in 2 days. The ship, which earns money only when at sea, not when it is sitting at a berth, could spend far more of its life at sea. The standardized metal box that McLean's system required became the ISO shipping container. The 20-foot and 40-foot steel units, built to a universal specification that can be transferred seamlessly between ships, trains, and trucks anywhere in the world where the equipment exists to move them. McLean made his patents freely available rather than licensing them, understanding that the system's value depended on universal adoption. By the mid-1960s, container shipping was crossing the Atlantic. By the 1970s, it was the dominant method of general cargo transport worldwide. Today, approximately 90% of the world's traded goods travel by sea, and the majority of that cargo moves in containers. The electronics in your home, the clothes in your wardrobe, the food that was grown on another continent, almost all of it arrived in a steel box on a ship, moving at 18 knots across an ocean, guided by a crew of 23. When Malcolm McLean died in 2001, container ships around the world blew their whistles in his honor. He had started with 58 boxes on a converted tanker. By the end, the entire world was moving in his idea. The best way to understand the scale of a modern ultra-large container vessel is to start with something familiar and build from there. A standard city bus is approximately 12 meters long. Place 33 of them end to end, and you have the length of one of the largest container ships currently in service, approximately 400 meters from the tip of the bulbous bow below the waterline to the stern. The ship is not 400 meters long, the way a runway is 400 meters long, presenting its length as a flat dimension you can walk and understand. It is 400 meters long, the way a city block is long, a structure with its own internal geography, its own distances, its own weather on the upper decks when the wind is coming from ahead. The MSC Arena, which as of this recording holds the record for the largest container capacity of any ship in service, can carry 24,346 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, the standard measure of container capacity. A TEU is one 20-foot ISO container. The MSC Arena can carry the equivalent of 24,346 of them. In practice, the containers come in a mix of 20-foot and 40-foot units. A 40-foot container counts as 2 TEUs, and the actual number of physical boxes aboard at any time is somewhat less than the TEU count. But the scale is real. On a fully loaded ultra-large container vessel, the containers stacked on deck reach approximately 22 stories above the waterline, visible from miles away as a vertical wall of steel boxes, each one a different color: red and white and blue and brown, and the green of refrigerated units, forming a mosaic that covers the entire deck from bow to stern, and from port rail to starboard rail. The beam, the width of the vessel, is 61.5 meters. This matters operationally because beam determines which waterways the ship can transit. The expanded Suez Canal, widened in 2015, can accommodate these vessels. The Panama Canal, even after its own expansion in 2016, cannot. The largest container ships are too wide for the Panama locks and must take the much longer route around Cape Horn if they need to pass between the Atlantic and Pacific. The global routing of trade is partly determined by which ships can pass through which waterways, and the draft, the depth of the hull below the waterline when fully loaded, is approximately 16 meters. This is the draft of a 6-story building. When a vessel of this size enters a port, the port must have water deep enough, berths long enough, and cranes tall enough to load and unload it. The requirement for adequate infrastructure limits, which ports these largest vessels can call at, concentrating ultra-large container ship traffic into a relatively small number of major hub ports worldwide: Rotterdam, Singapore, Shanghai, Los Angeles, where the necessary depth and crane height exist. The accommodation block, the superstructure that houses the crew, the bridge, the engine control room, and the officers' quarters, sits near the stern of the vessel, rising approximately 15 stories above the main deck. The bridge at the top of this structure is high enough above the water that, in clear conditions, the horizon is visible some 10 kilometers away, and the curvature of the Earth is just perceptible to the experienced eye. From the bridge, the bow of the ship is so far forward that in anything less than perfect visibility, it becomes difficult to see clearly. Navigation is done primarily by radar and chart plotter, rather than by direct visual observation of the ship's extremities. 400 meters of steel, moving at 18 knots, through any ocean on Earth, operated by 23 people, and carrying the world's cargo toward wherever the world needs it to go. 10 decks below the bridge, at the bottom of the ship's accommodation ladder, through a watertight door and down a series of steel stairs that descend into increasing warmth and increasing sound, is the engine room. The first thing that registers is the scale, not the noise. The noise is substantial, but expected. The scale is the thing that stops you at the bottom of the ladder, because the intellectual knowledge that a large ship contains a large engine does not fully prepare the body for the experience of standing inside a space that is genuinely cathedral-like in its proportions, occupied by machinery that is measured not in meters but in floors. The main engine of a large container ship is a two-stroke, slow-speed marine diesel. In the case of the largest vessels, it is typically a variant of either the MAN-B and W or the Wärtsilä low-speed two-stroke series, engines that represent the current endpoint of a century of development in marine diesel technology. The largest of these, the Wärtsilä RT Flex 96C in its 14-cylinder version, is 13.5 meters tall, 26.5 meters long, and weighs 2,300 tons. The crankshaft alone weighs 300 tons. Each piston weighs 5.5 tons. The engine produces 80,080 kilowatts of power, equivalent to 107,390 horsepower. It turns at approximately 100 revolutions per minute. This is worth pausing on. 100 revolutions per minute is not fast. A car engine at idle turns at approximately 700 revolutions per minute. At highway speed, near closer to 2,000. The marine diesel at full sea speed, producing enough power to propel 200,000 tons of loaded ship through the water at 18 knots, turns at 100 revolutions per minute, a pace slow enough that, standing in the engine room and watching the crankshaft through the inspection covers, you can follow individual revolutions with the eye. You can count them. The power does not come from speed, it comes from torque, from the enormous force generated in each cylinder on each downward stroke, leveraged through the massive crankshaft to the propeller shaft. The reason the engine turns so slowly is partly the fuel it burns. Heavy fuel oil, the thick, black, tar-like residue left after petroleum refining, has extracted gasoline, diesel, and all the lighter fractions, requires time to combust completely. A faster engine would still be burning one charge of fuel when the next was already being injected. The slow speed gives the combustion process the time it needs to complete efficiently, extracting the maximum energy from fuel that, at room temperature, cannot be pumped and must instead be heated before it will flow. The two-stroke cycle means the engine fires on every downward stroke of each piston. Every revolution produces a power stroke in every cylinder. A four-stroke engine produces a power stroke every other revolution. For an engine turning at 100 revolutions per minute, this doubles the effective power output without increasing the rotational speed, allowing the direct coupling of the engine to the propeller shaft without the gearbox that higher speed engines require. The sound from inside the engine room at full sea speed is not what most people expect. It is not a roar. It is a very deep, rhythmic percussion. The firing of each cylinder arriving as a distinct, heavy pulse in the chest more than the ears. The 14 cylinders firing in their sequence, producing a pattern that repeats 100 times per minute, with a steadiness that has nothing in common with the irregular note of a car engine, and everything in common with the sound of something very large and very certain doing its work. The heat is real. The temperature near the main engine at full load is significant. The engine management systems maintain the jacket cooling water, the lubrication oil, and the charge air at specific temperatures. And the thermal energy that cannot be usefully employed elsewhere is managed through the heat exchangers and the exhaust gas recovery systems. Modern marine diesel installations recover a portion of the engine's exhaust heat through turbochargers and steam generators, using that recovered energy to drive auxiliary machinery and reduce the overall fuel consumption of the vessel. The engine room at full sea speed is a place of absolute, methodical, unceasing work. At its center, turning at 100 revolutions per minute, the crankshaft that moves the world's cargo. In 2009, as fuel prices rose and global shipping volumes contracted in the aftermath of the financial crisis, shipping companies discovered something that changed how the world's cargo moves. They discovered that slowing down saved an enormous amount of money, so the relationship between ship speed and fuel consumption is not linear. It is cubic, meaning that a ship traveling twice as fast consumes approximately 8 times as much fuel. The precise mathematical relationship varies with hull form and engine characteristics, but the principle holds broadly across vessel types. Small reductions in speed produce disproportionately large reductions in fuel consumption. A container ship reducing its speed from 22 knots to 18 knots, a reduction of roughly 18% in speed, can reduce its fuel consumption by approximately 30%. At the fuel prices and shipping volumes of the post-2008 period, the financial case for running slower was so compelling that the practice became near universal in deep-sea container shipping within a few years, and the practice is called slow steaming, and it has quietly reshaped the rhythms of global commerce. Before slow steaming became standard, a container ship on the Europe-Asia route would typically operate at between 22 and 25 knots, completing the approximately 20,000 kilometer passage in 20 to 22 days. Under slow steaming, the same route at 18 knots takes approximately 25 to 27 days. The passage is slower. More containers are in transit at any given time because they spend more days at sea rather than in port. Shipping lines compensate for the longer transit times by adding more vessels to each service, maintaining the weekly port calls that shippers expect. The engine benefits from slow steaming as well. The two-stroke marine diesel is designed to operate efficiently across a range of power settings, and modern engine management systems can optimize combustion timing, fuel injection volume, and turbocharger behavior for the actual load condition rather than the theoretical maximum. Operating at 70 to 80% of maximum continuous rating, the typical condition under slow steaming, produces engine wear rates lower than those associated with sustained maximum power operation, extending the interval between major overhauls and reducing the maintenance costs that are the engine room team's primary concern. For the people aboard, slow steaming means more days at sea between ports. The ocean crossing, already a period of sustained, unhurried routine, extends, and the watch schedule runs its cycles more times before the coastline appears. The meals and the maintenance rounds and the navigation updates and the engine room rounds accumulate into a rhythm that, for seafarers experienced with it, is not a hardship, but a texture, the particular quality of long sea voyages that distinguishes deep-sea container work from short sea routes where port is always close. There is something in the economics of slow steaming that resonates beyond shipping. The discovery that reducing speed, accepting a longer journey in exchange for a more efficient one, produces compounding benefits that faster operation cannot match, is not unique to maritime transport. The ship that hurries burns 8 times the fuel to go twice as fast, and the ship that slows down arrives a few days later and uses a third less fuel and puts less stress on its machinery. The ocean does not hurry. The ship, at 80 knots, is matching its pace, and the cargo it carries will arrive. A little later, but there. The bridge of a container ship at night is one of the most carefully managed dark spaces in professional work. The lights are off, not dimmed, off. The bridge of a vessel underway at night is operated in near total darkness because the officer of the watch must maintain their night vision to be able to see lights on the water and at the horizon. And any artificial illumination that enters the eye resets the dark adaptation process that takes 20 to 30 minutes to fully establish. But the only light sources permitted on the bridge during night watches are the instrument displays. The electronic chart display, glowing green and blue, the radar screens painting their rotating sweeps, the AIS display showing the positions and headings of surrounding vessels, and the chart room to the rear of the bridge, which is curtained off so that its working light does not leak forward into the watchkeeping space. The officer on watch at midnight is responsible, under international maritime law, for the safety of the vessel, its crew, its cargo, and any other vessels in the vicinity. This responsibility is not shared with shore-based controllers the way air traffic management works for aircraft. The officer on watch makes the decisions. They assess the radar picture. They apply the international regulations for preventing collisions at sea, the COLREGs, the maritime equivalent of the road rules, to every developing situation, and they take action when action is required. The tools available are sophisticated. The electronic chart display and information system, ECDIS, shows the vessel's GPS position plotted on a digital chart, updated continuously with the planned track displayed as a line the navigator follows. The chart is not a paper chart, but a digital recreation of it, with depth contours and hazard markings and port approach information, all layered into the display and available at the touch of the screen. The radar. Most modern vessels carry two, operating at different frequencies for redundancy. Paints the positions of other vessels, land returns, and weather within its range. The automatic radar plotting aid, integrated with the AIS data, calculates the closest point of approach for every tracked target and alerts the officer if any vessel presents a collision risk. The AIS transponder broadcasts the ship's own identity, position, course, and speed to every other AIS-equipped vessel in range, and receives the same data from them. On a busy shipping lane, the English Channel, the Strait of Malacca, the approaches to major ports, the AIS display shows dozens of vessels, their tracks displayed as vectors indicating their course and speed. The whole picture updating every few seconds as every vessel's transponder refreshes its broadcast. At sea, away from the traffic of the major lanes, the picture is quieter. A midnight watch over the Central Pacific or the Mid-Atlantic may show only 2 or 3 other vessels within the radar's range of 12 to 24 nautical miles. The ocean is large, and the ships on it, however numerous they may seem in aggregate, are widely spaced at sea. The officer on watch may have the radar picture to themselves. The nearest other vessel 20 miles distant. No developing situations. The autopilot holding the course. The engine performing normally. In these conditions, the watch becomes a particular kind of vigil. The officer walks the bridge periodically, checks the instruments, looks out through the bridge windows at the dark ocean, seeing nothing but the navigation lights of the ship itself, reflected faintly on the water below. And on a clear night, in the stars, and returns to the chart table to update the logbook and verify the next waypoint. The ship runs through the night under this quiet attention. A dark bridge, a dark ocean, a steady course, and one person responsible for all of it, awake and watching, while the rest of the world below them sleeps. The MSC Arena is 400 meters long and carries 24,000 containers and is operated by 23 people. Let that proportion settle for a moment. A structure the length of 4 city blocks, containing cargo worth hundreds of millions of dollars, moving at 80 knots through open ocean, maintained and navigated and fed and managed by a team smaller than the staff of a medium-sized restaurant. The ratio of vessel to crew is one of the most striking facts in modern merchant shipping, and it is the result of 60 years of progressive automation, reducing the number of people required to operate a ship. Automation that has not replaced human judgment, but has concentrated the work that remains into fewer, more skilled, more responsible hands. The captain holds ultimate legal authority over the vessel. Under maritime law, the master's authority is close to absolute. The captain can perform marriages, can detain individuals who threaten the safety of the ship, and bears personal legal responsibility for the safe conduct of the voyage, the welfare of the crew, the security of the cargo, and the environmental compliance of the vessel's operations. Most masters on large container ships have 20 years or more of sea experience. A Class 1 Master Mariner license, recognized internationally, and a detailed working knowledge of the specific vessel they command. The chief officer is the executive officer of the deck department, responsible for cargo operations, the stability of the ship, the maintenance of the deck, and the life-saving appliances, and the administration of the deck crew. The stability calculation is a continuous responsibility. As containers are loaded and discharged at each port, the weight distribution of the ship changes, and the chief officer must ensure that the vessel's stability, its resistance to capsizing, remains within safe limits throughout. A container ship loaded carelessly, with heavy boxes stacked high and light boxes low, can become dangerously top-heavy, and the chief officer manages this through a stability computer that calculates the vessel's metacentric height and righting lever curves for every loading condition. The chief engineer is the head of the engine department, responsible for the main engine, the auxiliary engines, the electrical systems, the pumps, the purifiers, the steering gear, and every other mechanical and electrical system that keeps the vessel moving and habitable. The chief engineer's department on a large container ship typically comprises 2 or 3 watchkeeping engineers, an electrician, and several engine ratings. A total of 8 to 10 people maintaining machinery of extraordinary complexity across a 24-hour, 7-day schedule with no shore support available. The deck crew, the bosun, and the able seamen handle the mooring operations, and the deck maintenance, the lashing and securing of deck cargo, the maintenance of the life-saving appliances, and the 1,000 practical tasks of keeping a large ship in good physical condition during a voyage. The work is physically demanding and requires a deep familiarity with the specific systems and arrangements of the vessel, and the cook. On the list of crew roles, the cook appears near the bottom. In the reality of shipboard life, the cook is among the most important people aboard. 23 people, separated from shore for months at a time, dependent on the quality of the meals they eat for their morale, their energy, and the sense that someone aboard cares about their well-being. The standard of catering on a well-run ship is not spare or perfunctory. It is generous, varied, and managed with the understanding that food is not a secondary matter at sea. It is one of the primary supports of a crew's ability to do their work. 23 people, 400 meters of ship, every ocean on Earth. The mathematics should not work, and yet it does, every day, on every vessel in the world fleet, quietly and completely. Because the 23 people aboard are very, very good at what they do. The container is a box. This obvious fact is worth stating because the container's extraordinary impact on the world economy has nothing to do with any sophistication in its design. It is a rectangular steel box built to standard dimensions defined by the International Organization for Standardization, equipped with corner fittings, octagonal holes in cast steel inserts at each of the 8 corners, that accept the twist locks and spreader bars used to move and secure it anywhere in the world. The 20-foot unit is 6 meters and 58 centimeters long, 2 meters and 44 centimeters wide, and 2 meters and 59 centimeters tall. The 40-foot unit is twice as long, but otherwise identical in cross-section. These dimensions have been unchanged since they were standardized in 1968. The material is Core 10 weathering steel, an alloy that develops a stable, rust-like patina when exposed to the atmosphere, the patina itself providing protection against further corrosion. A new container is typically painted in the colors of its owning company or leasing company, but the steel beneath will outlast the paint by decades. Containers are designed for a service life of approximately 20 years of active use, during which they may make hundreds of ocean crossings and be lifted, stacked, trucked, and railed thousands of times. The corner fittings are the key to the system's universality. Every piece of equipment that handles ISO containers, every spreader bar on every crane in every port in the world, every twist lock on every container ship, every lashing point on every flatbed truck, and every railway wagon is designed around the same corner fitting geometry. A container loaded in Shanghai can be lifted by a crane in Rotterdam using the same spreader bar geometry, secured on a railway flat car in Germany with the same twist locks, and delivered to a factory in Belgium without anything about the container or its contents being touched at any point in the journey. This seamlessness is the source of the system's economic power. What travels in the containers is, in aggregate, the physical output of global manufacturing. Dry containers carry non-perishable goods, the electronics manufactured in Shenzhen, the textiles sewn in Bangladesh, the furniture assembled in Vietnam, the machine parts manufactured in Germany, the wine bottled in Chile, 40-foot containers of mobile phones, 20-foot containers of car parts. A 40-foot container can legally carry up to 26,000 kilograms of cargo. A fully loaded, ultra-large container ship with 24,000 TEU capacity and a mix of loaded and empty containers, or carries approximately 200,000 tons of cargo. Refrigerated containers, reefers in shipping terminology, carry the perishable goods that have come to define modern food supply chains. A reefer unit is a standard ISO container with an integrated refrigeration unit at one end, capable of maintaining any temperature from -30 degrees Celsius to +30 degrees, drawing power from the ship's electrical supply through plug-in points on deck and in the holds. The reefer container is why a supermarket in Oslo in January can offer fresh strawberries from Morocco and fresh salmon from Chile and fresh mangoes from the Philippines. The cold chain that allows this extends from the packing shed at the source, through the reefer container on the truck, through the reefer plug-in on the container ship, so through the port terminal and to the warehouse. An unbroken refrigerated environment of potentially 11,000 kilometers, maintained by the container and the power supplies it connects to at each stage. The box is simple. What it makes possible is not. It is the physical infrastructure of the world as we eat and dress and furnish it. A standard-sized steel rectangle, moving tonight in a stack 22 stories high on the deck of a ship that will not see land again for 16 days. Below the waterline at the bow of every large cargo ship, invisible to anyone watching from a dock or a passing vessel, there is a large, rounded bulge of steel. It is called the bulbous bow, and it is one of the most effective pieces of naval architecture in the history of commercial shipping. A device that reduces the fuel consumption of every large vessel that carries it by 10 to 15%, doing its work entirely underwater in complete silence, without any moving parts or electronic systems or maintenance requirements. It does what it does through pure hydrodynamics, and what it does is interfere with the wave the ship would otherwise make. A ship moving through water creates a pressure wave at its bow, the characteristic bow wave that fans away from the hull on both sides as the vessel advances. This bow wave represents wasted energy. The ship's engine is doing work that ends up as wave motion in the ocean, rather than as forward propulsion. The taller the bow wave, the more energy is being lost. In the era before the bulbous bow, ship designers worked to reduce bow wave height by refining hull forms, lengthening the ship, flattening the entry angle of the bow, reducing the waterplane area at the bow. These measures helped, but the bow wave persisted as a fundamental inefficiency. The bulbous bow provides a different solution. The bulb, positioned below the waterline at the bow, generates its own pressure wave as it moves through the water. A wave that, if the bulb is correctly designed for the vessel's operating speed and draft, is approximately half a wavelength out of phase with the main bow wave. The two waves interact destructively. The crest of one meets the trough of the other, and the combined wave is smaller than either would be alone. A smaller bow wave means less energy wasted and less resistance to the ship's forward motion, which means the engine can maintain the same speed with less power, or the same power achieves higher speed. The bulb must be designed for a specific speed range. A bulbous bow optimized for 22 knots will be less effective at 18 knots and may actually increase resistance at low speeds if it is very aggressively shaped. The shift to slow steaming has led naval architects to reconsider bulb designs for vessels that spend most of their working lives at significantly lower speeds than their original design speed. Some vessels built before the slow steaming era have had their bulbs modified, a significant dry dock operation, to better match their actual operating profile. The bulbous bow is not a recent invention, and its basic principle was understood by naval architects in the early 20th century, and experimental bulbs appeared on warships and ocean liners from the 1920s onward. The widespread adoption on merchant ships came later, accelerating in the 1970s, when rising oil prices made fuel efficiency a primary commercial concern. Today, every large cargo ship, tanker, and bulk carrier has one. The addition is sufficiently well established that a new vessel without a bulbous bow would be unusual enough to require an explanation. From the dock, watching a large container ship berth, the bulb is sometimes visible below the waterline at the bow when the vessel is riding high. It looks like a blunt fist of steel, too big and too rounded to be decorative, too simple to explain its purpose at first glance. Nay, it does not look like what it is. One of the most economically significant shapes in the history of transport. It has been saving fuel and reducing the cost of everything in every container on every ship that carries it. Since before most people who use the products it moves were born, quietly, below the waterline, every voyage. By day 3 at sea, the land is gone in every direction, not just behind, gone. The last coastline slipped below the horizon on day 1. Since then, the view from every point on the ship has been identical. Water extending to a circular horizon approximately 10 kilometers distant from the bridge, slightly further from the bow. The same in every direction. The sky above it. Nothing else. The watch system that structures the cruise time at sea runs on a 4 hours on, 8 hours off rotation, and the officer on watch takes the bridge at midnight and keeps it until 4 in the morning, when the next watch officer relieves them. The handover is brief and specific. The current position and speed, the weather conditions, and the forecast for the next 4 hours. The status of any developing traffic situations on the radar. The state of the engine, and any ongoing maintenance work. Any instructions from the master. Then, the outgoing watch officer goes below, and the incoming watch officer settles into the bridge chair, and the cycle continues. The midnight to 4 watch is the deepest of the night watches, the one that most completely removes the watchkeeper from the ordinary temporal markers of a day. By midnight, the ship has been at sea long enough that the port of departure feels distant. The next port is still many days away, and the ship exists in the middle time of a passage, between the departure and the arrival, committed to neither, belonging to the ocean for now. On a clear night over open ocean, the stars visible from the bridge of a cargo ship at sea are the stars of a sky uncontaminated by light pollution for thousands of kilometers in every direction. The Milky Way is a structure, not a hint. The planets are sharp and unblinking. If the night is dark enough and the sea is calm enough, the stars reflect from the water surface in faint, moving points below the horizon as well as above it. The sky duplicated in the dark water, the ship moving through a field of lights from all directions. The ship does not sit still in this field of lights. Its motion is perceptible. The slight roll and pitch that open ocean passages produce even in moderate conditions, and the steady vibration of the main engine transmitted through every deck and every bulkhead. The sound of the bow wave audible from the bridge wings as a low, rushing hiss rising and falling with the ship's speed through the water. The autopilot holds the course within a degree, making small corrections continuously. The slight yaw of the bow, left and right, around the mean heading, a movement too small to feel, but visible in the compass display. The ocean that the ship is crossing is not empty. The deep-sea pelagic zone through which the vessel's route takes it is inhabited by organisms at every depth, from the sunlit surface to the abyssal floor. The bioluminescent organisms of the mesopelagic zone making their nightly vertical migration upward as darkness falls, the surface warmed by the day's sunlight beginning to cool as the night deepens. On dark, calm nights in tropical waters, the bow wave of a cargo ship produces bioluminescence, the same cold blue-green light that a sailing yacht's bow wave produces. The dinoflagellates, disturbed by the ship's passage, flashing in the millions along the hull. The watch officer may not notice. The bridge is high above the waterline, and the bioluminescent bow wave is visible from deck level more clearly than from the bridge 15 stories above it. But the ocean is doing it regardless, lighting itself briefly in the passage of the ship, then returning to its dark as the hull moves through and beyond. The 4 hours pass. The relief watch officer climbs the stairs to the bridge. The outgoing officer writes the final logbook entry for the watch. Position, sea course, speed, weather, sea state, visibility, events. There are no events. The watch was uneventful. The ship is where it should be. The ocean is doing what the ocean does. The officer goes below. The new watch settles into the chair. The ship continues through the dark. The chief engineer does their morning rounds at 6 o'clock, not because anything is expected to be wrong. The main engine has been running at full sea speed for 68 hours without incident. The parameters steady within their normal ranges. Jacket cooling water temperature, scavenge air pressure, exhaust gas temperatures across all cylinders, lubrication oil pressure and temperature, all of them sitting where they should sit on the engine control room displays. The rounds are not an emergency response. They are the systematic, methodical inspection that keeps the engine from developing the kind of small, early-stage problems that become expensive and time-consuming if they are not caught. The engine control room is one deck above the engine room floor, separated from the main engine by a bulkhead designed to reduce both the noise level and the thermal loading on the space where the engineers work. Through the observation windows that look down onto the engine room floor, the main engine is visible. The enormous steel structure filling the width of the engine room. The access covers along its sides. The turbocharger at the forward end. The exhaust manifold running the length of the engine above the cylinder heads. At the engine control room has its own set of instruments, duplicating the readings available on the bridge. The chief engineer can monitor and adjust the engine from here without going onto the floor. The floor of the engine room at full sea speed is a place of significant sensory intensity. The noise is managed by the ear protection that everyone wears below, but the vibration is not something ear protection addresses. It is felt through the deck plates underfoot, through any surface the hand touches, through the bones of the feet and legs in a continuous low-frequency oscillation that, after a few hours, the body habituates to and stops registering as input. The heat near the main engine is real and managed. The ventilation systems push cool air through the space continuously, but the thermal output of the machinery is substantial, and the ambient temperature in the upper parts of the engine room runs well above the accommodation spaces on the upper decks. The chief engineer's inspection covers each major system in sequence. The main engine cylinder covers for any sign of leakage or unusual wear marks, the turbocharger bearings for temperature, the scavenge spaces for oil accumulation that might indicate a problem with the cylinder lubrication, the auxiliary engines that generate the ship's electrical power, the purifiers that clean the fuel and the lubricating oil before use, the steering gear at the aft end of the engine room. Each system is checked against the previous reading, any trend noted, any anomaly assessed. The main engine of a large container ship is designed with an expected overhaul interval that, and under normal operating conditions and with careful management, extends to many thousands of running hours before major component replacement is required. The piston crowns, the surfaces that face the combustion directly and endure the greatest thermal and mechanical loading, are the most frequently replaced items in the overhaul cycle. Each piston crown on the large bore two-stroke engine is itself a substantial piece of precision engineering, a complex casting with internal cooling passages through which oil circulates to manage the thermal load. In port, the engineering team's work changes character. At sea, the focus is monitoring, catching deviations from normal before they become failures. In port, as the focus shifts to planned maintenance, the overhauls and inspections and replacements that cannot safely be done while the engine is running. A container ship in port for 36 hours is a ship whose engineering department may be dismantling and inspecting a fuel injector, or replacing an auxiliary engine's heat exchanger, or attending to the dozens of smaller maintenance tasks that accumulate across a voyage and must be completed while the opportunity to stop things exists. The rounds take an hour. The logbook entry records all machinery operating normally. The chief engineer goes to breakfast. The engine continues its turns, 100 per minute, without stopping. The English Channel is approximately 32 kilometers wide at its narrowest point between Dover and Calais. Through this gap, more than 500 vessels pass every 24 hours, one of the highest densities of maritime traffic anywhere on Earth. Container ships, tankers, bulk carriers, ferries, fishing vessels, and a constant flow of recreational craft in the summer months all share a waterway that, by the standards of the deep-sea passages that large cargo ships spend most of their lives traversing, is not wide at all. A 400-meter container ship navigating the English Channel is doing something that has no real equivalent on land, moving a very large object through a narrow space that is simultaneously occupied by many other moving objects of varying sizes, speeds, and maneuverability. The traffic separation scheme in the channel manages this by organizing the traffic into lanes. Westbound traffic, ships heading from the North Sea toward the Atlantic, uses the lane closest to the French coast. Eastbound traffic uses the lane closest to the English coast. Between the lanes is a separation zone, which vessels must not enter unless crossing from one lane to the other. The scheme is established under international maritime law and monitored by vessel traffic services operated by the relevant maritime authorities. Dover Coast Guard on the English side and their French counterparts on the other maintain continuous radar watch and VHF radio contact with vessels transiting the strait. The shipping lane system does not stop at the English Channel. The major ocean routes that container ships follow across the world's oceans are not random paths. They are defined corridors shaped by a combination of geography, prevailing weather, fuel economy, and the historical accumulation of navigational experience. The North Atlantic routes cluster into specific bands that avoid the worst of the winter storm tracks while maintaining reasonable distances. The Pacific transoceanic routes take great circle paths, the shortest distance between 2 points on the surface of a sphere, modified by the practical realities of weather avoidance. The Indian Ocean routes converge on the Strait of Malacca, the narrow passage between the Malay Peninsula and the island of Sumatra, through which approximately a quarter of all seaborne trade passes. The Strait of Malacca is one of the world's most significant geographic bottlenecks. At its narrowest, the Phillips Channel south of Singapore. It is less than 3 kilometers wide, and the depth is shallow enough that the largest vessels must be careful about their draft. More than 80,000 ships transit the strait annually, carrying over 20% of global seaborne trade. Singapore sits at its southern end and has built one of the world's busiest container ports, partly on the basis of this geographic position. The natural intersection point of the trade routes between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. The Suez Canal provides the third major bottleneck in the global shipping network, the one that makes the Europe-Asia trade route viable without circumnavigating Africa. The canal, expanded in 2015 to accommodate the new generation of ultra-large container vessels, is approximately 193 kilometers long and handles around 20,000 vessels per year. And the transit takes approximately 13 to 16 hours. Every container ship on the Europe-Asia service that is not diverting around Africa passes through it, and the Canal Authority manages the daily convoy system that moves vessels northbound and southbound through the same water. The world's oceans are not empty. They are crisscrossed with invisible roads, organized by geography and weather, and the accumulated practical knowledge of centuries of maritime trade. And tonight, on every one of those roads, ships are moving, quietly, through the dark, carrying everything. The fuel that powers most of the world's cargo ships is not the diesel that fuels trucks, or the kerosene that powers aircraft. It is something darker, thicker, and more demanding. A substance called heavy fuel oil, or bunker fuel, which is the residual product of petroleum refining after the lighter, more valuable fractions have been extracted. Gasoline, jet fuel, diesel, lubricating oil, petrochemical feedstocks. All of these are drawn off during the refining process, each at its appropriate temperature in the distillation column. What remains when the lighter products have been taken is a dark, viscous material that at room temperature is closer to the consistency of tar than liquid, that must be heated to 60 to 90 degrees Celsius before it will flow, and that, in its unrefined state, contains high concentrations of sulfur and other impurities that previous generations of marine engines handled with some tolerance, but that modern environmental regulations have required to be managed with increasing rigor. The energy content of heavy fuel oil is slightly higher per ton than conventional diesel, approximately 42 megajoules per kilogram versus about 43 for marine diesel oil. The price, historically, has been substantially lower, reflecting both the residual nature of the product and the volumes consumed. A large container ship burns approximately 300 tons of fuel per day at full sea speed. 300 tons per day over a 16-day transoceanic crossing. That is approximately 4,800 tons of fuel consumed for a single voyage. The fuel represents one of the largest single operating costs of a container ship, and is the primary reason that slow steaming was adopted so rapidly when fuel prices rose. The financial incentive to burn less of it is enormous. The fuel is stored in the double-bottom tanks and the wing tanks that are built into the structure of the hull, below and around the cargo holds. The double bottom, the space between the inner and outer hull at the bottom of the ship, serves multiple purposes. It contains the ballast water used to maintain the vessel's stability and trim when it is not fully loaded, and it provides protected spaces for fuel, lubricating oil, and fresh water. The fuel tanks are accessed through manholes in the tank top for inspection and cleaning during dry dock periods. Before the fuel can be burned in the main engine, it must be processed. The purifiers, centrifugal separation machines that spin the fuel at high speed, remove water and solid contaminants that would damage the fuel injection equipment, and the heaters raise the viscosity to the level required for efficient atomization in the injectors. The fuel management system on a modern vessel monitors the fuel consumption continuously, logging the burn rate against the engine's power output and providing the data that the chief engineer uses to verify that the engine is performing within its expected efficiency parameters. The environmental impact of burning heavy fuel oil at the quantities that global container shipping requires has driven increasing regulatory pressure on the industry. The International Maritime Organization's 2020 sulfur cap reduced the permitted sulfur content of marine fuels from 3.5% to 0.5% globally, a change that required shipping companies to either switch to low sulfur fuels or install exhaust gas cleaning systems, scrubbers, that remove the sulfur oxides from the exhaust before it is discharged. The transition is ongoing. Some new vessels are being built to run on liquefied natural gas, which produces significantly lower sulfur and particulate emissions than heavy fuel oil, and research into ammonia and methanol as alternative marine fuels is advancing. The fuel is loaded at ports where bunkering facilities exist, a separate operation from the cargo handling carried out by bunker barges that come alongside the vessel, or by shore-based pipelines at berths equipped for the purpose. The bunkering operation is closely managed. The quantity received is measured, the quality is tested, or the tanks are sounded before and after to verify the delivery. The fuel is one of the ship's most critical consumables. It is also the thing that makes a crossing of the Pacific possible. 300 tons a day, the world moving on it. The cook wakes at 5:30. The crew breakfast is served at 7, which means bread needs to be started, stock needs to be on the stove, and the first calculations of the day need to be made about what 23 people will eat across 3 meals, using provisions that are available now and will need to last until the next port in 11 days. The ship's cook is not simply a person who prepares food. They are a nutritionist, a logistics manager, a cultural diplomat, and, given the isolation of the environment and the length of the contracts, one of the most significant contributors to crew morale on the vessel. The galley on a large container ship is not tiny. Unlike the compact, gimbaled galley of a sailing yacht, the container ship's galley is a purpose-built commercial kitchen equipped with industrial ovens, large capacity cooking ranges, deep fryers, a cold room for refrigerated provisions, a freezer room for frozen stores, and storage for the dry goods and staples that sustain the crew between port calls. The equipment is secured for sea, but is otherwise similar to what a small hotel kitchen would use. The cook has a full set of tools available. What the cook does not have is easy resupply. The provisions loaded at the last port must last. Fresh vegetables and fruit are consumed in the first week, Then comes the frozen produce, the tinned goods, the dried staples. The provision planning that precedes a port call is a careful accounting exercise. How many days to the next port? How many people to feed? What are the preferences and dietary requirements of the current crew? What fresh items should be prioritized? A cook who plans well gives the crew fresh food for as long as the voyage allows. A cook who plans poorly exhausts the interesting options early and faces the last days of a passage with declining stores and declining enthusiasm in the mess. The crew mess is a particular social institution. On most container ships, the officers eat separately from the ratings. The senior officers in the officers' mess, at the deck and engine ratings in the crew mess, reflecting the hierarchical structure of the ship's organization. But within each mess, the meal is a genuine communal event. The 4-on, 8-off watch cycle means that not every crew member is available for every meal, but the meal times are fixed and the food is available at those times. And the people who are off watch and in the mess are, for the duration of the meal, simply people eating together in a small room at sea. The quality of this experience varies enormously between vessels and between companies. On a well-run ship with a skilled cook, meals are an occasion, varied, substantial, culturally attentive to the mix of nationalities in the crew, presented with the care that someone who takes the role seriously brings to it. Filipino crew members, who make up a very large proportion of the global seafaring workforce, have a cooking tradition that handles the constraint of shipboard provisioning with considerable skill. The rice that serves as the dietary foundation, the adobo, and the sinigang that work equally well with tinned or fresh protein. The desserts that can be made from long-life ingredients. European officers bring their own preferences. Indian crew members bring theirs. The cook navigates all of it. On the container ship at sea on day 7, the cook is making lunch. Outside the galley portlight, the ocean is grey-blue and slightly rough. A 20-knot breeze from the northwest is running a moderate swell that the ship is taking at a slight angle, producing a gentle, regular roll. Inside the galley, the pots are secured in their holders on the range. The bread that came out of the oven an hour ago is cooling on the rack. The soup is ready. At noon, the officers coming off watch and the ratings finishing their morning maintenance rounds will fill the mess. They will sit down. They will eat something warm and made with care. And for 20 minutes in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 1,000 miles from the nearest land, the world will be a table and food. And the company of people who are in this together, that is not nothing. At sea, that is quite a lot. The pilot boards at 3 in the morning, not at a convenient time. At the time the vessel's arrival schedule dictates, which is 3 in the morning, under the pilot boat coming out from the port in the dark and positioning itself alongside the vessel as the container ship reduces its speed to allow the transfer. The accommodation ladder, a set of steel steps rigged down the side of the ship from a platform on the main deck, swings above the pilot boat, and the pilot, wearing a life jacket, climbs the ladder as the 2 vessels rise and fall on the same swell at slightly different rates. The pilot is a specialist in this particular port. They know the depths of the approach channel, the behavior of the currents at this state of the tide, the turning basin where the vessel will be swung to align it with the berth, the specific challenges of the berth itself. Ports are not simple places to navigate. They are complex environments of shallow water, fixed structures, moving vessels, and tidal currents, and the confined space that makes any error difficult to correct. The pilot brings the local knowledge that the vessel's master, arriving from another ocean, cannot possess. The tugs are already underway, their powerful propulsion systems ready to exert the lateral forces that a vessel of this size cannot generate for itself in confined water. A 400-meter container ship, once moving, has the momentum of 200,000 tons behind it, and a rudder that is effective only when there is flow across it, which means only when the vessel is moving forward. At the very low speeds required for port maneuvering, the rudder is nearly useless, and the vessel is effectively steered by the tugs. 2 or 3 tugs, one at the bow and 1 or 2 at the stern, push and pull the ship with precision, so responding to the pilot's instructions on the VHF radio. The berthing is slow, the vessel moving at less than half a knot in the final approach, the tugs pressing it gently against the fenders that protect the key face from the contact. The mooring gang on the dock takes the heaving lines thrown from the ship, hauls the mooring ropes through the fairleads and onto the bollards, and the vessel is made fast. 6 or 8 mooring ropes from the bow, and the stern holding the ship against the berth, their tension adjusted by the winches on deck as the current or wind tries to move the ship. The shore power connection is made. The ship's generators, which have been producing the vessel's electrical power throughout the voyage, are supplemented or replaced by power from the shore supply, reducing engine room running requirements while in port. The gangway is rigged, a shore access structure deployed from the ship's side or provided by the terminal. And the port formalities begin. The customs and immigration officers, the port health authority, the agent who represents the shipping company's interests ashore and manages the logistics of the port call. And the cranes begin. The container cranes at a major port terminal are among the largest moving land structures in operation. The post-Panamax cranes, used at hubs like Rotterdam, Singapore, and Shanghai, stand approximately 100 meters above the dock, their outreach extending far enough over the vessel to reach the containers on the far side of the deck. Each crane cycle, spreading the lifting beam down to the container, locking the twist locks, hoisting so as traversing to the dockside, lowering onto the trailer or the terminal stack, takes approximately 2 minutes. At 30 moves per crane per hour, a terminal with 6 cranes working a single vessel is handling approximately 180 containers per hour. A container ship in port for 36 hours, worked by 6 cranes, can discharge and load approximately 10,000 container movements. Then the lines are cast off. The pilot boards again. The tugs take the strain, and the vessel returns to sea. International maritime law requires that every officer on a commercial vessel maintains competency in celestial navigation, the skill of determining position using the sun, the stars, and a sextant, even in the era of GPS and electronic chart systems. This requirement is not nostalgia. It is a recognition that the electronic navigation systems on which modern shipping has come to depend are vulnerable in ways that celestial navigation is not. GPS signals can be jammed or spoofed. Maritime authorities have documented increasing instances of GPS interference in certain regions, where the signals received by vessels indicate positions far from their actual location. Electronic chart systems can fail. satellite communications can be disrupted. The compass, the sextant, and the stars are not dependent on any external infrastructure and cannot be switched off by anyone. The navigation officer on a modern container ship uses the ECDIS, the electronic chart display and information system, as their primary navigation tool. The ECDIS plots the vessel's GPS position on a digital chart, displays the planned route, and shows depth contours and hazard areas, and integrates the radar and AIS data into a single display. It is an extraordinarily capable system that would, in virtually all normal circumstances, provide everything the navigator needs. The celestial navigation skills that the officer carries are the backstop, the capability that exists precisely because the primary systems are assumed to be working until they are not. The noon sight has been taken on commercial vessels since sextants became standard equipment in the 18th century. At local apparent noon, the moment when the sun is at its highest point above the horizon, varying by a few minutes each day, and by longitude across the ocean, the navigator takes a sextant sight of the sun, measuring its altitude above the horizon. This altitude, all combined with the sun's declination for that date from the nautical almanac, gives the vessel's latitude directly. It is the simplest of celestial observations, requiring no precise time measurement, and it gives a definitive north-south position line that the navigator can compare against the GPS-derived position to verify the electronic system is functioning correctly. Star sights, taken at dawn and dusk when both the stars and the horizon are visible simultaneously, give a fuller fix. Two or more position lines from different stars intersecting to give both latitude and longitude, and this requires a precise time measurement. The sextant altitude alone does not give position without knowing exactly what time the observation was made. And the chronometer, that has been a fixture of the navigator's toolkit since the late 18th century, when John Harrison's marine timekeeper finally solved the longitude problem that had bedeviled navigation for centuries. The passage plan that governs the vessel's route from port to port is prepared by the navigation officer and approved by the master before departure. It defines the planned track as a series of waypoints connected by rhumb lines or great circle segments, annotated with the expected positions and times at each waypoint, the relevant navigational hazards along the route, the planned speeds, and the contingency actions if the weather requires deviation. And the passage plan is a document, a record of the thinking that has been done about this specific voyage, this specific route, these specific hazards, and it is kept on the bridge and referred to throughout the transit. Every 4 hours, the watch changes and the logbook is updated. Position, course, speed, wind, sea state, barometric pressure, visibility. The entry takes 3 minutes. It is the most routine act on the bridge, performed thousands of times in a career, each entry almost identical to the one before. And it is also a document that, in the event of an incident, provides the complete record of the vessel's navigation from departure to arrival. The logbook is paper, the GPS is electronic. The stars are navigational aids established 4 billion years before either, and all three are aboard the vessel tonight, so each one a different answer to the same question. Where are we? A seafarer on a large container ship typically signs a contract of 4 to 6 months. For 4 to 6 months, the ship is where they live, not a place they visit or transit, a place they inhabit fully, sleeping and eating and working, and spending their off-watch hours within its steel walls, waking to the same view of ocean or the same view of a terminal crane depending on the day, returning to the same cabin at the end of each watch, whether the ship is in Singapore or Rotterdam or the middle of the Pacific. The crew aboard a modern container ship is almost always multinational. International Maritime Convention designates English as the working language of all commercial vessels, regardless of flag state or crew nationality. But the actual linguistic environment aboard is almost always more complex than this. A vessel operated by a European shipping company might carry officers from the Philippines, Ukraine, India, and Croatia, with ratings from the Philippines and Indonesia. The common language is English. The bridge communication, the safety procedures, the technical documentation are all in English. But the social language in the crew mess and the accommodation corridors is whatever the shared nationality allows. A Filipino ratings crew will be speaking Tagalog when no procedural requirement demands English. Ukrainian officers will be speaking Ukrainian with each other. Filipino seafarers make up approximately a third of the world's merchant seafarer workforce. The largest national group in international commercial shipping, since the Philippines produces more licensed marine officers and ratings than any other country, and the maritime education and training system there is substantial, with dedicated maritime universities and training centres. The seafaring profession has been economically significant to the Philippines for generations, with a large portion of the remittances sent home by overseas Filipino workers coming from the maritime sector. The accommodation on a modern container ship is considerably more comfortable than popular imagination typically supposes. Officers have private cabins with ensuite bathrooms, small, functional rooms, but genuinely private. Ratings may share in some older vessels, but have individual berths and lockers. The recreation facilities on a well-equipped modern vessel include a gym, a television lounge with satellite television and a DVD library, internet access via the ship's satellite communication system, and a small swimming pool on some vessels. Not a 25-metre lap pool, but large enough to sit in and feel the sun on a day off in the tropics. The maritime connectivity that satellite communications provide has transformed the quality of life at sea for the crew. 10 years ago, communication with family ashore was limited to occasional expensive satellite phone calls and email subject to the ship's data plan. Today, most new container ships are equipped with high-bandwidth VSAT systems that allow video calls, streaming, and social media access, a connection to the ashore world that previous generations of seafarers did not have. Add the isolation that characterized deep-sea sailing before this era has been substantially reduced, even if the physical separation from home remains. The off-watch hours are not unstructured. The Maritime Labour Convention, the international instrument that sets minimum standards for working and living conditions aboard ships, specifies minimum rest periods. A seafarer must receive at least 10 hours of rest in any 24-hour period, and at least 77 hours in any 7-day period. These minimums are the floor. On a well-run vessel with adequate manning, the actual rest periods are longer, and the off-watch time is genuinely free for the crew member to use as they choose. Sleeping, eating, exercising, watching a film, calling home. At the end of the contract, the seafarer flies home. The ship continues. A new crew member joins at the next port. The watch continues without interruption. The ocean does not wait for the handover. It never has. The North Atlantic in winter is one of the most challenging operating environments for large vessels anywhere in the world. The depression systems that form over the warm waters of the Gulf Stream and deepen as they move northeast across the Atlantic can produce sustained winds above 50 knots and wave heights of 10 to 15 meters over large areas of open ocean. These are not unusual conditions in the North Atlantic winter. They are routine, expected, planned for in the seasonal routing guidance that ship operators follow, and that shapes the track recommendations issued by the weather routing services that most large container ships use on their transatlantic and Europe-Asia passages. A 400-meter container ship in heavy weather is a very different experience from the open ocean calm that occupies most of a deep-sea voyage. The motion becomes significant. The ship pitching, its bow rising over each swell and falling into the trough, the bow slamming into the face of the next wave, with a sound and a shock that propagates through the entire structure. The slamming, the impact of the hull against the wave surface when the bow is dropped hard into the trough, is a specific concern for ship structures and cargo security. Repeated severe slamming can cause structural fatigue at the bow. Container securing systems must be adequate for the accelerations generated by the ship's motion in the seaway. As the containers on deck are secured by a system of twist locks, the same fittings used to connect containers in the port terminal stacking cranes, combined with stacking guides that align containers vertically above each other, and lashing bars and turnbuckles that are applied diagonally between the containers and the deck fittings to resist the lateral and longitudinal forces generated by the ship's motion. The lashing calculation, determining the correct combination of securing equipment for the stack height, the weight distribution, and the expected sea conditions, is performed by the chief officer using a computerized stability and lashing program. Insufficient lashing is a genuine risk. Containers lost overboard in heavy weather are reported every year, with the International Union of Marine Insurance estimating approximately 1,500 containers are lost at sea annually, though some estimates are higher. The crew's experience of the ship in heavy weather depends largely on where in the ship they are. The accommodation block at the stern is the most stable part of the vessel in a head sea. The long distance from the bow reducing the pitching amplitude that makes the forward accommodation uncomfortable. Engineers working in the engine room during heavy weather are in one of the most stable spaces aboard. The engine room is deep in the hull and well aft, and the machinery operates the same, regardless of the sea conditions. Officers on the bridge experience the motion most directly. The high position above the waterline amplifying every pitch and roll, so that the speed is reduced in heavy weather, partly to reduce the structural loads from slamming, partly because attempting to maintain full sea speed into head seas consumes disproportionately more fuel for very little additional progress, and partly because in severe conditions, the master is required by good seamanship to operate the vessel at a speed appropriate to the conditions. The decision about speed is the master's. There is no external controller telling the ship how fast to go, and it reflects the master's assessment of the sea conditions, the vessel's motion, and the margin of safety that the situation requires. The weather system passes, the seas moderate, the speed increases back toward the service speed, the motion eases, and the bow stops its heavy plunging and returns to the easier motion of a vessel in a manageable seaway. The watchkeeper updates the logbook. Wind decreased, sea state moderating, speed increased to service speed, no incidents. The ocean quiets, and the ship, which absorbed everything the weather gave it and continued, moves on. At dawn on the 16th day, the first officer on the bridge picks up a return on the radar that is not a ship. It is too large and too stationary to be a vessel. It is land, the destination coast, still below the visual horizon at the vessel's current draft, and the eye height of the bridge is visible on the radar at 40 nautical miles. The land return painting solid on the display. The defined shape of a coastline that the electronic chart confirms is exactly where the passage plan predicted it would be 16 days ago at departure. At the approach to port begins with the deepwater pilot station at the entrance to the port approaches. The vessel is already reducing speed. The full sea speed setting that has been maintained for most of the crossing is not appropriate for the confined waters of a port approach, and the engine telegraph is moved back through its settings in the measured sequence that reduces power while maintaining maneuverability. The watch officer has been passing position updates to the next watch and to the master, who is now on the bridge as the vessel enters pilotage waters, the area where port approach regulations require the master's presence. The containers on deck will begin their next journeys within hours of the vessel berthing. The terminal's container handling system, the cranes, the rubber-tired gantry cranes in the stacking area, at the terminal trucks that move containers between the ship and the stack, is already allocated to this vessel's arrival. The containers that are to be discharged have been identified by the stowage plan, their positions on the ship mapped in the terminal operating system, the sequence of discharge optimized by the planning software to maintain the vessel's stability throughout the operation. A container from a clothing manufacturer in Guangdong province, loaded onto this vessel 14 days ago, is now in the third row from the port side, 12 bays from the forward end, at the fourth tier above deck. The stowage plan knows exactly where it is. The crane operator, working from the operating system display, will pick it up at a scheduled time and lower it onto a terminal truck. The terminal truck will carry it to the stacking area. A rubber-tired gantry crane will lift it onto a stack. Within 24 hours of the vessel's arrival, the container will be picked up by a road haulier and driven to a distribution center, from which the individual garments inside it will be sorted and sent to retail outlets. The container's journey from factory loading dock in Guangdong to retail distribution center in Northern Europe has taken approximately 22 days. The sea passage was 16 days. The rest is the port handling and the land transport at each end. From the perspective of the supply chain, the 16-day sea passage, 11,000 kilometers of ocean at 18 knots, is the slow part of the journey. The rest moves faster. The pilot is on the bridge. The tugs are taking station. The vessel is aligned with the approach channel. The containers, which have been stationary relative to the ship for 16 days, are about to move. First, the crane, then the terminal truck, then the gantry, then the road haulier, then the distribution center, then the shelf, then the person who ordered it, or walked past it, or picked it up, without knowing it had crossed the Pacific to be there. The ship will be back at sea within 36 hours, loading the next cargo, beginning the next crossing. The work does not stop. It never stops. The world keeps ordering things, and the ships keep carrying them. The last container is loaded at 11:15 at night. The crane operator completes the final move to the spreader bar rising from the container and retracting upward toward the crane's trolley. As the deck officer on the hatch confirms the stack is complete, and the securing crew begins rigging the final lashing bars. The terminal reports to the vessel that all containers are aboard. The chief officer, who has been monitoring the loading operation from the cargo control room, runs the final stability calculation. The metacentric height is positive and within its approved range. The stowage plan is complete. The vessel is ready for sea. The lines are cast off at midnight. The pilot boards. The tugs take station at the bow and the stern. The vessel is walked off the berth and turned in the outer harbour until the bow points toward the sea buoy at the harbour entrance. The pilot descends to the waiting boat, and the officer of the watch plots the departure track, and the autopilot is engaged. The engine telegraph moves to full ahead. You have spent this voyage learning what these ships are. You know now that the ship you are imagining, the one already clearing the harbour entrance into open water, its navigation lights moving through the dark past the last of the land-based lights, is powered by an engine weighing 2,300 tons that turns at the speed of a slow walk and produces enough power to propel 200,000 tons through the ocean at 18 knots. You know that its cargo is a standardized system invented by a North Carolina truck driver who watched cotton being loaded in 1937 and did not act on what he saw until 19 years later, and then changed how everything in the world moves. You know that the bulbous bow below the waterline is saving 10 to 15% of the fuel that would otherwise be burned in silence on every crossing. You know that the bridge is dark at night and the watch officer is alone in it, responsible for the vessel and its crew and its cargo and the safety of everything in its vicinity, updating the logbook every 4 hours in a record of meticulous, unhurried attention. You know that the cook wakes at 5:30, that the chief engineer does rounds at 6, that the containers on deck are secured with twist locks and lashing bars calculated to withstand the accelerations of a winter North Atlantic, that the fuel burning 300 tons a day is the residual product of refining crude oil and must be heated before it will flow, that the seafarers aboard signed contracts of 4 to 6 months and are sleeping in their cabins right now, the off-watch rest that the Maritime Labour Convention requires being taken in full, the motion of the ship absorbed into the background of a life at sea. The ocean is vast. The shipping lanes cross it invisibly. The vessels move through them in their dozens and hundreds, each one carrying thousands of containers, each container carrying things that people ordered or need or will find on a shelf and pick up without wondering how it got there. It got there on a ship like this one, through an ocean like this one, at night like this one. Before you close your eyes tonight, there is one small thing that means a great deal to this channel. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet, because tomorrow night we will be here with another story built for this exact hour. Your place is held, but for now, the harbour lights are falling behind the vessel. The sea buoy is passing to port. The water ahead is open and dark, and goes all the way to the horizon, and then a long way further. The engine has found its rhythm. The watch officer has settled into the bridge chair. The logbook is open to tonight's page. Position, departure, course, set, speed, 18 knots. Weather, clear. The ship is at sea. The night is long. Sleep well.